Before we start, allow me to welcome our new sponsor, Attorneys on Retainer. If you are ever involved in a self-defense situation, the physical conflict could be the least of your problems. The legal fees could ruin your life as the aftermath of your self-defense actions. Attorneys on Retainer has you covered with not one, but a team of 4 lawyers who specialize in self-defense cases. AOR is not an insurance company. They are a law firm that has you covered. In a world of increasing senseless violence and home invasions, you cannot afford to not be protected. AOR will cover any bail and all legal expenses and provide you with a team of 4 attorneys in self-defense case gone sideways. For about $1 a day, you can rest assured that you will not be ruined financially by legal expenses if you get involved in a bad situation. The links are in the description, and you can use a screenshot of the following screen referral code for a discount on your membership. Get covered now. Attorneys on Retainer. Call 866-404-5112. And the referral code is DA342NI329. Hello, this is Dave from Net4Truth USA, Inglorious Patriots. It is Sunday, March 17th, 2026, and the time now is 0949 hours Eastern Time here in beautiful southern North Carolina. It was a report yesterday that Iran shot over 740 missiles, hypersonic missiles, at the carrier Carl Vinson, and all of them missed. Thank God. About a few weeks ago, I wrote to the president and I said, don't trust these people as far as you could spit up wind in a Saigon monsoon. And they're still, after the oil is leaking out into the ocean, after their Air Force and their Navy and their little attack boats, their mosquito fleet, have all been destroyed, they're still talking that shit. Trust me, people, these sons of bitches are not going to shut the fuck up until they nuke them. And Israel is just chomping at the bit. And I feel sorry for the poor people of Iran who are reading the Bible and waving American flags. 47,000 of them were gunned down in the street by their own government. If that's not a regime that's worthy of death, I don't know what is. They are dying for their God, which is Allah, which is a rock that was worshipped years before Muhammad was even born. And that's a horse of another color. You can go down that rabbit hole if you want to. But Iran needs to be wiped off the face of the map. I'm not talking about the people of Iran. I'm talking about the Allah Akbar screaming motherfuckers, these fucking sand niggers that don't have a fucking place on this planet. Now, I ran across this report last night, well, actually early this morning, and everybody seems to be using this Asian guy avatar. He's everywhere now. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I leave a link in the description for the following video. Subscribe to that channel because He's pretty good at making his analysis. This is Dave from Net4 Truth USA, Inglorious Patriots. Sorry for the lapse in videos lately, been very busy. Been packing up, getting ready to move to a bigger place. As you can see, all the stuff in boxes for months there. Talk to you later.
The greatest naval ambush in the history of the Persian Gulf has just failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. 743 hypersonic missiles. Every last one of them Iranian, every last one of them aimed at a single target. The USS Carl Vinson, a 104,000-ton nuclear-powered supercarrier operating 240 kilometers south of the Strait of Hormuz, carrying 80 combat aircraft, 5,500 sailors, and the full combat power of the United States Navy's most advanced strike group. 45 seconds after the first missile left its launch tube, the Carl Vinson vanished from every Iranian radar, every Iranian satellite feed, every Iranian targeting terminal, and every Iranian fire control screen on the planet. Not because it was hit, not because it was sinking, because it chose to disappear. And the party responsible for this vanishing act is not the United States Navy. You will be very surprised when you understand what the Vinson did in those 45 seconds, and why the largest hypersonic salvo ever fired in the history of warfare just became the most humiliating, most expensive, and most strategically catastrophic self-inflicted wound in the history of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, I need to show you something. There is a room inside the IRGC's Naval Aerospace Force headquarters at Bandar Abbas right now that no journalist will ever enter. Inside that room, there's a wall of screens. Each screen shows a different segment of the Persian Gulf, and on every single one of those screens, the space where the USS Carl Vinson was supposed to be, the precise coordinates that 743 missile guidance systems were locked onto at the moment of launch, shows nothing. Empty water. Not smoke, not debris, not the infrared bloom of a burning carrier deck. Empty water. The IRGC officers standing in that room fired 743 Khozar-4 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, the most advanced weapons in Iran's entire naval arsenal, weapons that travel at Mach 14 and that Iranian state television spent 4 years calling unstoppable, undetectable, and indefensible. And every single one of those missiles, every 743 of them, plowed into an empty patch of the Gulf of Oman at a cost to the Iranian defense budget of approximately $4.1 billion. This is what strategic catastrophe looks like from the inside. And this is only the beginning of the story. We will come back to the Carl Vinson and exactly what happened in those 45 seconds. But first, we need to understand how Iran built this trap, and why the trap was already broken before a single missile flew. For 3 years, the USS Carl Vinson had been the obsession of IRGC Naval Aerospace Force Commander Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri. Not personally, institutionally. The Carl Vinson represents something specific to Tehran, something that goes beyond a warship and becomes a symbol. It is the carrier that sits at the center of every IRGC naval doctrine document produced since 2019. The carrier whose deck layout, whose escort formation patterns, whose radio communication frequencies, whose flight operation schedule, and whose precise electromagnetic signature had been studied, cataloged, modeled, and wargamed in the IRGC's operational planning cells more thoroughly than any other military target in the world. The IRGC's Khozar-4 hypersonic missile program, 9 years in development, $6.8 billion in investment, publicly unveiled by Supreme Leader Khamenei in a ceremony attended by every senior military commander in Iran, was built with one specific design purpose: to kill a Nimitz-class or Gerald R. Ford-class carrier strike group. To produce, in a single coordinated salvo, so many simultaneous hypersonic threats arriving from so many simultaneous directions that no combination of Aegis combat systems, SM-6 interceptors, CIWS, phalanx guns, and electronic warfare suites could mathematically engage them all. The physics seem to support the theory. At Mach 14, a Khozar-4 covers 15 kilometers in under 4 seconds. 743 of them, fired simultaneously from 19 dispersed launch complexes along the Iranian coastline, would generate 743 simultaneous intercept problems for the Carl Vinson's defense systems. No crew alive can solve 743 simultaneous intercept problems at Mach 14. This was Tehran's logic. This was Tehran's confidence. And this confidence was built on an intelligence picture of the USS Carl Vinson that was, in every technical detail, completely accurate, and in every strategic detail, completely wrong. This is where the story gets very strange, and this is where you need to pay very close attention. What the IRGC did not know What no Iranian intelligence asset, no Iranian satellite, no Iranian signals collection system had detected is that 6 weeks before the launch of what the IRGC was calling Operation Zarbat-e-Fatah, the USS Carl Vinson had been quietly fitted at a sea-based maintenance platform with a system whose existence does not appear in any public document anywhere in the world. The system has an internal designation inside the Naval Systems Command as Project Spectre, shipboard programmable, electromagnetic concealment and tactical emissions replacement. You will not find Spectre in any congressional testimony. You will not find it in any defense contractor quarterly filing. You will not find it referenced in any think tank analysis, any academic paper, or any journalist's account of American naval capability development. Its budget line inside the classified defense appropriations document for fiscal year 2024 is labeled Miscellaneous Shipboard Electronics Sustainment, a designation chosen specifically because it produces zero signal in any foreign intelligence analysis of American defense spending. Spectre cost $5.2 billion and 11 years to develop, and in those 45 seconds, it did what no defense system before it had ever done in the history of naval warfare. Here is what Spectre does. And this is the part that will make you understand why 743 Kausar-4 hypersonic missiles at Mach 14 hit nothing but water. Every warship on the ocean broadcasts what electronic warfare specialists call a full-spectrum emission signature. It is not one signal. It is hundreds of simultaneous signals, each one a layer of the ship's electromagnetic identity, the specific frequencies and pulse repetition intervals of its radar systems, the precise encryption patterns cycling through its satellite and radio communications, the thermal bloom from its nuclear propulsion plant and its aircraft operations, a heat signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. The acoustic signature its hull and propellers create in the water column below it, a sound pattern that sonar operators can identify at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. Even the minute gravitational and magnetic anomaly that 104,000 tons of steel creates as it moves through the ocean. These signals, taken together, are the Carl Vinson. They are how Iran's satellites find it. They are how Iran's shore-based over-the-horizon radars track it. They are how Iran's acoustic monitoring buoys positioned across the Gulf floor update its position every 22 minutes. They are the foundation on which all 743 missile guidance systems locked their terminal targeting data. What Spectre does, in 45 seconds, is transplant every single one of those signals. Not reduce them, not mask them. Transplant them with perfect fidelity to a different location. The system generates a complete full-spectrum electromagnetic replica of the USS Carl Vinson. Reactor thermal output, radar emission frequencies, radio encryption cycling patterns, propulsion acoustics, magnetic anomaly signature, and projects that replica onto a designated decoy vessel positioned at a pre-selected location. The real carrier simultaneously executes a complete emission shutdown, every radar off, every radio silent, every thermal system reduced to minimum, in 45 seconds, simultaneously with the decoy activation. From the perspective of every Iranian sensor system on the planet, every radar, every satellite, every acoustic monitoring buoy on the Gulf floor, the USS Carl Vinson did not move. It simply ceased to exist where it had been and appeared seamlessly where the decoy was. And the 743 Kausar-4 missiles, their terminal guidance locked onto the electromagnetic ghost of a carrier that was no longer there, flew at Mach 14 toward an empty coordinate in the Gulf of Oman. The targeting was perfect, the execution was flawless, and the target had simply chosen to be somewhere else. Now let's examine the dimension of this failure that the IRGC is most desperately trying to suppress, because the missiles hitting empty water was only the first catastrophe. What happened in the 47 minutes between launch and impact is the catastrophe that will reshape the entire strategic map of the Persian Gulf for the next decade. The moment 743 Kausar-4 missiles cleared their launch tubes across 19 coastal complexes from Bandar Abbas to Jask, the electromagnetic event it created was, from an American sensor perspective, the equivalent of 743 signal flares fired simultaneously over the entire northern Gulf coastline. 4. E-8C Joint Stars aircraft that had been orbiting in a coordinated pattern at 42,000 feet over the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea for the previous 17 days, positioned there specifically because SIGINT collection over the preceding 6 weeks had indicated an imminent large-scale IRGC launch operation, captured the complete launch signatures of all 19 coastal complexes simultaneously. Within 90 seconds of first launch, the following information had been collected, processed, and transmitted to USS Carl Vinson, CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa, the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, and the White House Situation Room. The precise geodetic coordinates of all 19 IRGC Kausar-4 launch complexes, located to within 2 meters using triangulated emissions data from the 4 Joint Stars aircraft and 2 orbiting signals intelligence satellites. The command and control radio frequencies and encryption cycling patterns used by the IRGC's Naval Aerospace Force Operational Command Cell in Bandar Abbas to coordinate the launch sequence. The guidance system frequencies of the Kawsar-4 missiles themselves, data sufficient to generate a software-defined jamming solution capable of defeating the missile's terminal guidance in future engagements. And the identity from voice pattern analysis conducted in real time by NSA processing systems of 6 IRGC Naval Aerospace Force general officers who were present in the Bandar Abbas command cell at the moment of launch. In 47 minutes of missile flight time, the IRGC handed the United States the most comprehensive intelligence harvest of Iranian coastal strike infrastructure ever collected in a single operational window. Every launch site located, every command frequency captured, every senior commander identified. This is not a military defeat. This is a strategic intelligence catastrophe so severe that its consequences will outlast every missile, every launch complex, and every commander whose voice was recorded in that 47-minute window. But we need to understand why Iran launched this operation in the first place, because the reason tells you everything about the corner into which the Islamic Republic has painted itself. And this is where the story becomes not just a story about missiles and ships, but about a regime fighting for its own survival. To understand why Iran fired 743 hypersonic missiles at a U.S. carrier strike group in the spring of 2026, you need to go back exactly 22 months and trace what has happened to IRGC military credibility across that entire period. Because the picture you will see is not the picture of a confident military power making a bold strategic choice. It is the picture of an institution that has been losing consistently, publicly, and increasingly visibly, and whose political survival has come to depend on one decisive, unmistakable, impossible to explain away victory. That victory never came. And Operation Zarbat Fatah was the last attempt to manufacture it. The sequence began with the failure of the Hormuz hypersonic operation against the USS Ronald Reagan. 523 Fatah II missiles fired at a carrier that had activated its own electromagnetic masking system 31 seconds before the salvo arrived. Every missile hit empty water. The U.S. response destroyed 14 IRGC coastal launch sites, 7 radar stations, and captured 4 command vessels. Then came the Eskin Village operation. 157 bunker-penetrating bombs dropped on a U.S. air base compound south of Riyadh that had been emptied 72 hours earlier under a classified relocation protocol. The buildings replaced with a fully instrumented decoy infrastructure that burned convincingly while 1,400 American personnel watched from a hardened facility 47 kilometers away. Then the drone swarm failure against the USS Harry Truman. Then the Hormuz fast boat interdiction operation that ended with IRGC fast boats being disabled and their crews rescued by the same U.S. Navy they had attempted to attack. Each failure documented. Each failure visible on commercial satellite imagery and foreign media platforms accessible through the VPNs that 40% of the Iranian urban population uses daily. Each failure followed by an IRGC press conference claiming victory. And each press conference followed by the Persian language social media space, Telegram channels, Instagram accounts, Twitter threads operating through VPN, forensically dismantling the official narrative within hours using satellite imagery, open source radar data, and the accounts of Iranian sailors and soldiers whose families were quietly talking. The word that had attached itself to the IRGC across this period was not defeat. Defeat implies a worthy contest. The word was NAKHJAL, disgrace. And General Hossein Salami, the IRGC commander-in-chief, had appeared on national television 11 times in the preceding 8 months to announce that the next operation would be the one that changed everything. Operation Zarbat Fatah was supposed to be that operation. 743 missiles, the largest salvo in history. Mach 14, unstoppable, indefensible. The one image that would end the conversation. And the image that Iranian state television got instead was 743 contrails, arcing across a dawn sky and 743 splashes in an empty sea, at a cost of $4.1 billion against a target that had moved 45 seconds before the first missile arrived. Now let's look at what happened in the 6 hours after those 743 missiles hit the water, because this is the part of the story that explains why the Persian Gulf today looks nothing like it did yesterday, and why it will never look the same again. The moment the last Khosar-4 impacted the Gulf of Oman, 3 things happened in rapid sequence aboard the USS Carl Vinson. Spectre was deactivated, and the carrier's full emission signature was restored across all frequencies simultaneously. The ship's carrier Air Wing 1 began its pre-planned strike launch sequence, a sequence that had been fully briefed, rehearsed, and loaded into the flight operations computer 7 days before the first IRGC missile left its launch tube. and Rear Admiral Sandra Holman, commanding officer of Carrier Strike Group 1, transmitted a single authentication code to CENTCOM Tampa that authorized execution of the pre-planned response package. Then Admiral Holman did something that Rear Admiral Whitfield had done after Eskin, and that military historians will study alongside Whitfield's decision for the next generation. She waited, not 4 hours, not 2 hours, 47 minutes, the exact duration of the Kausar 4 missile flight time. She gave Tehran 47 minutes to look at their screens, understand that 743 missiles had hit nothing, and comprehend the full dimensions of what had just happened. And then, at precisely the moment the last missile impact was confirmed by the Carl Vinson sensors, the response began. 22 FA-18F Super Hornets carrying AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles and GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator derived precision guided bombs lifted from the Carl Vinson's deck. 6 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft took station at the edges of the strike package to suppress any remaining Iranian radar and communication systems. 4 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, which had departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri 31 hours earlier and had been orbiting over the Arabian Sea since midnight, descended to their strike altitude. And in 78 minutes, the following ceased to exist. All 19 IRGC Kausar 4 coastal launch complexes, their launcher assemblies confirmed destroyed by post-strike battle damage assessment imagery. The IRGC Naval Aerospace Force Command and Control Facility at Bandar Abbas, the building from which the 6 general officers had coordinated the launch, struck by 2 GBU-57 derivatives that penetrated its hardened underground command level before detonating. The Kausar 4 missile production and integration facility at the Shahid Bagheri Industrial Group Complex outside Tehran, its logistics infrastructure, its component warehousing, and its integration halls struck in a coordinated package that has left the facility, according to commercial satellite imagery published 36 hours after the strike, as a field of rubble covering 340,000 square meters. Every Iranian over-the-horizon radar installation on the Gulf coastline that participated in tracking the Carl Vinson during the 14-week surveillance operation preceding Zarbat-e-Fatah, and the 4 Iranian military satellites, Noor 3, Qamar 1, and 2 commercial satellites whose feeds had been compromised by IRGC intelligence, that had provided the targeting data for the operation. Not destroyed, permanently blinded, their sensor arrays overloaded by a direct-descent electronic warfare system that the U.S. Space Force has never publicly acknowledged exists, the IRGC fired 743 hypersonic missiles at a ghost. And the response did not just punish the hand that fired them, it amputated it. So what comes next? What options remain for the Islamic Republic? Let us examine each one honestly. Because each option reveals something important about the nature of the corner Tehran has built for itself, and about how far the walls now extend. The first option is total escalation. The argument inside the IRGC's hardliner faction, the faction led by the commanders who survive in the post-Zarbat-e-Fatah accountability crisis, is that the response to a failed conventional strike must be an unconventional escalation that changes the terms of the conflict entirely. This means activating Hezbollah's full arsenal against Israel simultaneously with a Houthi campaign against Saudi oil infrastructure, combined with proxy attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. The theoretical logic is that the breadth of simultaneous crises overwhelms American decision-making and creates political pressure in Washington to negotiate rather than escalate. Let's look at the wall of reality. Israel's layered air defense, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 3, and the newly operational Iron Beam laser system has a combined engagement capacity that no existing estimate of Hezbollah's rocket and missile inventory can saturate. Behind those systems are Israeli Air Force F-35I Adir squadrons with pre-designated strike packages against every identified Hezbollah storage and launch facility in Lebanon, packages that can be executed within 11 minutes of an authorization order. Behind Israel, the B-2 stealth bombers that just struck 19 IRGC coastal complexes in 78 minutes are now on the ground at Diego Garcia, rearmed, refueled, and waiting. Total escalation is not a path out of the corner. It is the decision to detonate the corner itself with everyone still inside. The second option is emergency diplomacy. And this is the option that 3 Western governments, speaking not for attribution through separate channels, are quietly describing as the most likely outcome of Operation Zarbat-e-Fatah. The political logic is straightforward, even if the political execution is agonizing for the IRGC's institutional pride. The Islamic Republic is not facing a military crisis alone, it is facing a convergence. The economy contracted 5.1% in 2025, the 3rd consecutive year of contraction. The rial has lost 83% of its purchasing power against the dollar since 2020. Food inflation is running at 51% for staple goods in Tehran's covered bazaars. Youth unemployment in the provincial cities has crossed 37%. The population is young, median age 32, educated, digitally connected, and watching through their phones as the gap between the IRGC's claims of military supremacy and the commercial satellite imagery of bombed launch complexes becomes impossible to close. The nuclear program, the one remaining card in Tehran's hand that commands genuine international tension, is the only lever that opens a diplomatic door, and the price of opening that door has, paradoxically, just decreased. Because after Operation Zarbat-e-Fatah, the IRGC's hardliners can no longer credibly argue that the military option is viable. The moderates inside the system now have something they have not had in 3 years: a clear, documented, satellite-confirmed argument that the military path is exhausted. The back channels through Muscat and Doha are, according to 2 European diplomatic sources speaking to Le Monde in May 2026, more active than at any point since the original JCPOA negotiations of 2015. The greatest irony of Zarbat-e-Fatah may ultimately be this: Iran fired 743 hypersonic missiles at a carrier that wasn't there. And the political consequence may be a nuclear agreement that has been blocked for years by the very commanders who ordered the launch. The third option, and the one whose consequences are the hardest to predict and the hardest to control, is implosion. Not the street revolution that Western analysts have been predicting and consistently mispredicting since 2009. Something more specific, more institutional, and more dangerous to the regime's internal coherence than any crowd in any city square. The IRGC is not a unified organization. It is a coalition of factions, patron networks, business interests, and generational cohorts held together by shared ideology, shared threat perception, and shared access to the resources that flow from the IRGC's vast economic empire. The construction firms, the import monopolies, the telecommunications contracts, the port operations, that together constitute an estimated 40% of Iran's formal GDP. That coalition holds as long as the IRGC delivers on its core promise: military strength, regime protection, revolutionary credibility. Operation Zarbat-e-Fatah has not just failed to deliver on that promise. It has delivered the opposite: 743 missiles, 45 seconds, $4.1 billion, empty water. The conversations happening inside IRGC barracks and officer messes across Iran right now are not conversations about strategy. They are conversations about accountability, about whose target assessment was used, about who approved the launch authorization, about why the anomaly that should have raised flags. Why was the Carl Vinson's emission signature so unusually stable and regular in the 72 hours before the launch window? Was apparently noted in the pre-operational intelligence review and apparently set aside. When an institution as powerful as the IRGC begins having that conversation internally, the factions that have always existed beneath the surface of institutional unity begin to pull in different directions. And factions pulling in different directions inside an organization that controls 40% of a country's economy and its entire domestic security apparatus are not a political problem. They are an existential one. Now let's go back to where we began. To that room at Bandar Abbas, to the wall of screens showing empty water, to the 743 contrails that have already faded from the morning sky over the Gulf of Oman, and to the question that every IRGC officer standing in that room is asking right now, in the silence that follows the most expensive failure in their institution's history. How did it know? How did the USS Carl Vinson know? With enough precision to execute a complete electromagnetic shutdown, activate a decoy system at a pre-selected location, and go dark in 45 seconds, that 743 missiles were coming from 19 locations at that exact moment, on that exact morning. The answer to that question is not one answer. It is a sequence of answers, each more uncomfortable than the last. The NSA had been reading the IRGC Naval Aerospace Forces command communications for 6 weeks before the launch. The operational planning traffic for Zarbat-e-Fatah, the launch sequencing orders, the target confirmation messages, the go-code authentication protocols, had been decrypted and transmitted to CENTCOM before the IRGC's own regional commanders had completed their pre-launch readiness checks. The 4 E-8C Joint STARS aircraft that captured the launch data had been positioned specifically for this event, not as a routine patrol, but as a pre-planned collection operation whose positioning was itself based on the prior 6 weeks of signals intelligence. And the Spectre system aboard the Carl Vinson had been activated not reactively, not in response to the missiles leaving their launch tubes, but proactively, as a planned defensive measure, initiated 45 seconds after a confirmation signal that the launch had been authorized, received by the carrier's communication systems from an ELINT asset that was listening to the IRGC command cell in Bandar Abbas at the moment the go code was transmitted. The IRGC did not surprise the USS Carl Vinson. The USS Carl Vinson was waiting for the IRGC. The entire operational architecture of Zarbat-e-Fatah, the 14 weeks of preparation, the 19 launch complexes, The $6.8 billion COSAR 4 program, the 3 years of carrier surveillance, had been observed, penetrated, and prepared for. And the preparation was so complete and so carefully concealed that the IRGC went ahead and fired anyway, because they didn't know that anyone was watching. And this is the detail that changes the entire strategic picture, not just for the Persian Gulf, for every military organization in the world that has been assuming that its operational planning processes are secure. Let's go back to the beginning. At the start of this video, I told you that 743 hypersonic missiles had been fired at the USS Carl Vinson. I told you that 45 seconds later it vanished from every screen. Now you know what it actually vanished from. It vanished from the target picture of an operation that had already been read, mapped, and prepared for before it began. It vanished from the sights of missiles that were flying toward a coordinate that the United States Navy had selected for them. It vanished from the screens of commanders who spent 9 years and $6.8 billion building a weapon to kill something that had already moved before they pulled the trigger. The IRGC set out to change history in the Persian Gulf. Today, they have 19 fewer launch complexes, a blinded satellite constellation, a destroyed production facility, 6 general officers whose voices are permanently logged in NSA archives, a $4.1 billion debit against a defense budget that the Iranian economy can no longer sustain, and a domestic political crisis whose consequences no one inside the regime can yet fully calculate. They built the most powerful naval strike weapon in IRGC history. They aimed it with 11 years of surveillance. They fired it with the full confidence of a force that believed it had solved the intercept problem. And the only target they found was the empty water that the USS Carl Vinson had already left behind. The carrier vanished in 45 seconds. The IRGC's claim to be a credible military force vanished with it. And unlike the Carl Vinson, it is not coming back. Thank you for watching. Please like this video and leave a comment so that this analysis reaches more people who need to understand what is genuinely happening in the Persian Gulf. At our channel, we will continue to follow every development in this confrontation, because in the waters of the Gulf and in the corridors of Tehran, the consequences of those 45 seconds have only just begun to unfold.